Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannifan from State of State, a Penn State football show within the Bleav Podcast Network. He is Rhett Lewis, former Indiana Hoosier wide receiver and representing both the Big Ten and NFL Network. Big news regarding the Big Ten and the SEC in regards to the college football playoff and what the expanded playoff, yes, it might expand again. It's going to expand again as early as 2026, and the ramifications not only for the Big Ten and the SEC, but the entirety of college football now that the Big Ten and the SEC have control of the college football playoff. This is a major shift in the history of this sport. We are going to get into all of that right here on Bleav in Big Ten. This show is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from the NBA to college basketball and the NHL and UFC. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. So let's first dive into some of this reporting that came from Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports. I want to quote directly because I love the way that he wrote this. Quote, "Last spring, during intense and at times heated negotiations over the future of the college football playoff, leaders of the Big Ten and SEC threatened to create their own postseason system if they were not granted a majority of college football playoff revenue and full authority over the playoff format. In the end, executives of the 10 FBS leagues and Notre Dame signed a memorandum of understanding, handing control over to college football's two richest conferences." Good Lord.
Yeah, it's all here. But is anyone really surprised by this?
No.
I mean, we can whine and cry and, call names.
We're not crying here, I believe, in Big Ten. The rich get richer.
Very excited. No, I mean, like everyone else on the, I guess on the outside looking in, I certainly, I feel like, has a right to feel like, well, wait a second here, well, what do we do? Notre Dame was just an independent, was in the, national title game. Well, they were part of this memorandum of understanding. And I think when you look at the numbers and when you look at the data, it simply speaks for itself. And we could certainly get into that, looking at it in terms of what a proposed 14 playoff would have meant over the course of the last 10 years, and then also for the 16-team format. But the bottom line is the SEC and the Big Ten have dominated the participants in the college football playoff, especially if you were to widen it to 14 and to 16. And the averages just pointed out. And that's basically how the commissioners of each conference now, in conjunction with the college football playoff, are going to format the new expanded playoff moving forward. It's to provide greater avenues for the two conferences whom on average have dominated the participants. And look, for good reason. It's not like we're just cherry picking and putting them in. It's like they have been the best teams. Now, look, this last 2 months, this is what I don't want, Tom. I don't want to sit here talking about who deserved to get in and who didn't deserve to get in. Okay? That's what I want to stay away from. But I think this still gives us, what we wanted. And I think ultimately, as soon as the 12-team format came about, you're like, okay, well, surely a 14 team and a 16 team is coming down the pipe, right? I mean, like, it's just, we always want bigger, we want better, we want more. And I think that's ultimately what we're going to see, and probably what most people figured we were signing up for when we moved it off the 4-team number initially.
It's expected to move to 14 and then the 16. So if you're these other conferences, not the Power 2, but the remainder of the Power 4, or the Group of 5, you're looking at that as like, okay, the bigger it gets, we'll still have opportunities to get in.
Yeah.
A real winner in this but I'm not surprised either, is Notre Dame. Notre Dame being on an island by itself. Like, I cover Penn State regularly, and James Franklin has said, I think everybody should be in a conference. Is there going to be a time where the Big Ten and or the SEC look Notre Dame right in the eyes and they're like, you're joining one of us or you're not a part of this anymore?
That's an interesting question. I don't think as long as there's at large bids, which essentially is what got Notre Dame to the national championship game this year. Why would they? And especially if it goes to 16 and there all of a sudden becomes 3 at-large bids, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about here. And we'll get into this here in a second, but just to answer your question on Notre Dame, like I don't know. I don't know how you could truly bully them into it. If they continue down this path of we are going to be consistently a top 10 football team in America, which look, they have been, for the most part under Marcus Freeman. There was obviously a couple of years, here and there with Brian Kelly, but for the most part, they were still going to the beat. They were going to the CFP a couple of times. They're always right there. And as long as there is a pathway and it doesn't just become, a place for the Power Four conferences, I think it's going to be okay, unless something happens with the at-large bids, which I just don't see that happening.
Notre Dame, if anything, stands to be able to go on a tremendous run here in the next 5 to 10 years. The longer they can resist being in a conference, the better, because all the reporting came out about the money they made by competing in the college football playoff as an independent versus all these other teams competing as a part of their conference. These other teams are making a fraction of what Penn State, of what Notre Dame made, excuse me. So if the Irish can keep that up, they should be able to gain a substantial leg up in the world of college football in the short term. But looking at this, is this good for the health of the sport?
I think we got to get into the format and to kind of understand who's in and who's being minimalized or marginalized and not. So the 14 team format, to really answer that, as you know, now you're talking about 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten and for the SEC. Mm-hmm. And then you'd get 2 spots each for the Big 12 and the ACC, and then 1 spot for the group of 5, and then 1 at large, right? Is how that essentially would work out. The committee, as it's control, I was also reading this part. The selection committee's role in this new world of expansion feels diminished, right? Because they're not really having to parse through, beyond the conference champions. There's not going to be eight ways that you can go here. Like you got to find 4 from the Big Ten, you got to find 4 from the SEC, and that sort of thing, and on and on. So the selection committee, as the memorandum stipulates, also controlled by the SEC and the Big Ten, would seed 1 through 14 or 16 based directly on the top 25 rankings. So looking at that, I think there's, I think it feels pretty equitable to me. Again, if we go back, if we look at the numbers, and then we'll get to how everybody's feeling about it, right?
Right.
Over the course of the life of the college football playoff, if you went back and looked at it using this format, 4 automatic qualifiers to Big Ten, SEC, 2 to ACC, 2 to Big Ten, 1 G5, 1 or 3 at-large bids, depending on whether you're talking about 14 or 16. Over the last 10 years, the Big Ten has sent 50. Let's go 14 first. Big Ten has sent 51 teams, SEC 52. If you would have done a 14-team format for the last 10 years, that averages about 4.5 teams a year. Mm-hmm. Big 12, 23 teams. ACC, 20. And so that's basically what this new idea of expansion is allowing for. 4 Big Ten teams on average, 4 SEC teams on average. Those are the 4 that are going in. 2 Big 12, 2 ACC, 1 from the group of 5. And then Notre Dame had made it 5 times, and so would get in as an at-large in those scenarios. The way Notre Dame has been playing, though, like that's the at-large bid feels like the Notre Dame bid, right?
Pretty much, as long as they're competitive. But, yeah.
And they play a good enough schedule every year. And they will be in a position to claim that at-large bid, every single year. Where it gets them ranked and all that, I guess, is a different scenario. But then with the 16 team, it's the same way. You'd average 5 from the Big Ten a year. You'd average 5 from the SEC a year. You'd go 2 from the Big 12, 2 from the ACC, 1 from the group of 5, and then 3 at-large bids at that point. So which could, of course, come from group of 5. There's ways around. So ultimately, like, I don't feel it like it is that it is a non-equitable distribution of college football resources with the way it's being formatted out at this point.
If anything, I'm looking at teams like Boise State, and it's like, boy, you better get out of the Mountain West. Why be there? There's less and less reason to be in that conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to matter, but like there's nowhere. I mean, they're going to be in the Pac-12, right?
Right.
Once that, yeah, they're going to be in the Pac-12 here. So, but even then, it's not. They're not going to get the Pac-12 is not going to get one of the automatics.
No.
So they're hoping. You got to be hoping for 16 team format at that point, right? I mean, to have a better shot at the at-large.
The thing I like about all this is that there's the element that the SEC for a long time has wanted to go to a 9-game conference schedule for all teams. So like, I think there's a lot of. I mean, as a viewer, we've
wanted them to.
We've wanted them to. Yeah, they've not really.
They've resisted because they don't want more losses on the resume.
No, they want to continue to play Citadel and Mercer in November. I think that's, as a fan, I'm glad to see that go. And if altogether this gets rid of cupcake games, I'm okay with that. I would love to see something in the vein of what college basketball does of the Big Ten SEC Challenge and the early parts of the season. Make those games a little bit more exciting. I think the positive about this, having those 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten and the SEC, is I just would like this ranking system to go away. In that, I am not saying you abolish 1 through 25. I don't think that's ever going to go away in college football. And that's something that drives ratings. You tune in for a game because teams are ranked, right? But coming to some sort of determination, a la the National Football League, which you cover intimately. And then it's like, hey, how'd you do in your conference? Did you have the most wins? Did you win your conference? Great, you're in. As opposed to this eyeball test, and they played this team and they played that team. It's like, let's just settle this damn thing so we're not doing these arguments into oblivion.
Well, in the preseason top 25 is the one that really, kind of sets the bar and sets the expectation, right? For, and so then, weaker teams that were ranked higher and, depending on their schedule, can stay all the way up there for a long time, provide some buffer, provide some cushion, if they were to falter because of where they started the season for no reason other than just expectation and buzz. And, that part of it, I think, is tough to swallow sometimes. But the other thing that I'll say here, and this was one of the quotes from Tony Petitti, going back to your point on getting rid of cupcake games here. Petitti last summer had told Yahoo Sports, if leaders get the postseason right, the Big Ten and others could then have the ability to play stronger non-conference schedules, which means there would be, if you have more playoff spots, there is more room for error, more room for, losing a close game to a really good opponent in September, and then still finding a way to the postseason. That's why everyone's been afraid of it for so long. It's like, why we can't have a loss, in the first 4 weeks of the season and then just be, playing out the string for the remaining 10 games or 9 games. And so if that is part of this, win. If we're seeing more of the best players of college football playing postseason football, win. If NIL is keeping players in college longer and being a part of the college experience longer, however jaded that experience may or may not be,
right,
depending on how the money controls it, that still feels like a win to me. So I think I honestly feel like this is a step to more of what we ultimately want, which are better games year round.
I think the coaching element is interesting in that in the SEC, those teams that are on the fringe, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in there, pressure gets ratcheted up a whole lot more. Not that it wasn't already there, but I'm looking at like the Ole Misses of the world, Lane Kiffin. It was like, okay, this expands and you're still missing these things. You're going to be in trouble. And it's the odd thing about, you look at how these conferences, they have such different cultures and atmospheres and just a general feeling about them, is that it's felt to me for a very long time. There's a lot of Big Ten programs that are just content rolling the ball out there and, well, we had a good season. And now that really changes. And everybody wants to win. Sure, everybody wants to have a good season. But it feels like it's no longer just going to be acceptable to be like, well, we went 7-5 and we tried our best and we spent a little money here. It's like, no, like, who the top 4 teams in the Big Ten feel like right now. You can reasonably look at Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. that fourth spot, it's like, okay, USC, Illinois, depending on what Michigan is able to put together next season. They had a rough season last year, but it's like, you kind of know who those four are. So is it going to be acceptable for the remainder of the Big Ten to just be like, we tried Northwestern, Purdue, Maryland, Nebraska, even like all these schools that have just been like, well, we gave it our best. Wisconsin, it's not going to be okay anymore.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you look at Indiana again. It's just such a great example of seeing a window of opportunity.
Yeah,
expanded playoff. They had to go off the top ropes to reimagine the program and deal with.
Thank you for that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Wrestling, we got you. So, I mean, like, you think about it, was a $20 million buyout that they had to figure out with Tom Allen. They had to make that work because the athletic department saw what was on the horizon, and that if a new coach could help bring a bigger influx of money in, right, you wouldn't mind paying the $15 million that you ultimately paid to Tom Allen to move on and to bring Curt Cignetti in, and the money you're now paying Curt Cignetti because you are a part of this. You are relevant in December. You are a conversation piece in major college football, and you are a college football playoff team. And so I think teams and programs will see the window of opportunity and say, all right, now's our chance. We got to spend money to make money. And if that is the case within this conference, and I'm sure that this could lead to further conference expansion, right? I mean, like, that's the other thing. Like, how many ACC, how much more conversation are we going to get around Clemson and Florida State? You know what? We want to be a part of the league that gets 4 AQs, not 2. Right. So let's go. Let's find a way to get out of this thing here in the ACC and move into the Big Ten. But again, like, it just comes down to it to me. Like, I just seeing the way that the Big Ten and SEC got in this year, if they're still, and then seeing Notre Dame still survive, not more than survive, they thrived right in the format. I still don't think that they're going to be pressured into trying to find a way into one of those conferences. But at this point, I look at all that, and the next big question for me is what happens with championship games?
Great question. Yeah.
Right. And I think Ross talks about it a little bit in this piece. Ross Dellinger, again, terrific reporting. He and his colleagues at Yahoo Sports have been kind of all over this from the jump, and a number of other outlets have had similar reporting in other places. But it feels like conference championship games become less valuable. And maybe there's a way, though, where a championship weekend provides the setting for those 4 automatic qualifiers. Is there a play-in situation? Now, I'm like, all right, how long is the season going to end up being?
Right. Yeah. And no one cares about the health of the kids, really. Like, in all this. It's just more games,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's no way, shape, or it cannot exist in this format to where the college football season ends any later than it already did. To me, it was already too late. We got to find a way to end this thing on New Year's Day. Like, that's the format change that I want. We got to crown the national champion on New Year's Day, then let the NFL go bananas with the playoffs and all that, right? Like, let's own that. Let's own that day. I know Joel Klatt has talked about that a lot.
I agree with him. Ended on New Year's Day, ended at the Rose Bowl. Period.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure you'd have plenty of fans in the Southeast that would feel like that is a little bit of an unfair location.
It's perhaps unfair that almost every other national title game has gone down in Atlanta. So,
right, well, that's true. It does feel that way. Yeah. So I'd be really curious to see what happens with conference championship games. I don't know that I have the best solution for it, but the next thing that I want to see is, like, how does the seeding change? And how do conference championships or conference championship weekend play-in games, whatever they ultimately end up deciding, how does that affect format? I don't know that I saw a ton about how the seeding would work, because it's all still very.
There's supposed to be a meeting in New Orleans this Wednesday for more discussions on this, so we'll have to keep an eye on this developing situation. For me, it's like, I use the NFL model. It's like, okay, like, how did you do in the NFC East, for instance? and you constantly have that churn in the NFL, and obviously the draft system
Parity,
facilitates that. You have that parity. NIL created more opportunities, but you're still seeing the blue bloods be the blue bloods. I'm curious how this is going to affect, as I mentioned, like, yes, those teams in the middle that have just been like happy to roll the ball out there and see what shakes out. But what happens to like the Purdue's of the world? What happens to the Mississippi States of the world, where you are just a perennial bottom feeder and there's not necessarily a lot of opportunities for you to bow up unless a booster just all of a sudden hits the lottery or something like that and decides to make Mississippi State a powerhouse in the SEC, for instance?
I think there's a way for most of these programs that we're talking about to figure out the money part.
Because Purdue, not to cut you off, devil's advocate, if you're a player, you're like, okay, 4 automatic qualifiers. So that interest in going to the SEC is great, but the interest in going to that top half of the league becomes even greater. Like, why would you even entertain some of the lesser ones unless you're like, okay, I just want to get on the field, I just want to play.
No, I think
money, that sort of thing.
I think I would go the other way with it, Tom. Honestly, I think that just getting into the conference is going to give you an opportunity. You know, one way or the other. I think, you know, for prospective players, you're going to be looking at that and saying, all right, one, what is my best chance to play, contribute on a championship level team? Right. So, you know, you got to, that's kind of like a 4-pronged situation there. So it's like, all right, what is my best chance to play, to contribute, and then to contribute enough to a team that is capable enough and has enough resources.
So I go to Mississippi State and then I transfer to Bama and I go.
Well, sure. That's certainly kind of been there, done that. We've seen that plenty of times in that type of, world, in the conferences alone, right? But I do think you're going to see that as opportunity. And look, if Mississippi State or if, you know, Purdue and Northwestern aren't looking at this and saying, this is a golden opportunity for us to become a part of the relevancy in December and January every year, because we're in this conference, and now with revenue sharing, if all that comes to be, and we can have at least a baseline of ways to go out and get players, and to at least be on a more level playing field. It's not like this. It'll probably still be like this, right? With the other sweeteners that collectives and NIL can still bring, in addition to the rev share model. Like I feel like there is just great opportunity up and down the conference, especially in the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, if you are a lower tier team in the Big 12 and the ACC, I think things are going to be harder.
To handle on this, the threat that the Big Ten and the SEC put out there is that, hey, if you don't give us control of this, we're just going to do our own playoff. Is there part of you that was like, kind of wish they'd done that?
Yeah, I would love to see it, but I do think that as part of this, you're going to see more scheduling between Big Ten and SEC teams.
Yes.
Knowing that you don't have that weight of, all right, you know, if we lose this game and we slip up maybe once in conference, we're going to be fighting. We're going to be in that debate again, you know, to get one of those final spots in this thing. So I think that's going to open up a much better regular season, a more relevant regular season, a more relevant non-conference season with this 14 and especially a 16-team format.
If we could get to a place where the automatic qualifiers had hard and fast rules of this is how you get in and this is what your record has to be.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we need less of the debates. We need less of the rankings, less of the eyeball tests, et cetera. The more that you can make this uniform.
Yeah. There's a formula, right?
That way it's none of these schools crying all off season. Oh, we didn't get in. We were on the outside looking in, especially as this branches further and further out, 14, 16 teams. You're going to be plausibly looking at the teams that are 15, 16, 17, 18, and you're like, you weren't going to win the national title in the first place.
Yeah.
The same argument could have been made this year with the 12-team playoff and the teams that got excluded that were all crying, oh, I should have been in.
Right. Well, I mean, Notre Dame and Ohio State, you know, would have had a reason to cry if it was the 14th.
Oh, yeah. But like, know? South Carolina wasn't going to win the national title. Illinois was not going to win the national title.
Probably not. But you want to have that opportunity to play it out on the field and not in our brains. So,
I agree with that. That's why I'm like, let's stop with the debates. Let's stop with the rankings, automatic qualifiers. This is a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Tell us what you think. Get at us on social media. Get in our comment section on
Please
YouTube.
do.
Blow us up. He's Rhett Lewis. I'm Tom Hannifan. Thank you for joining us here on Bleav in Big Ten.